and this is for Richard. I do believe that every side has two, every story has two sides to it, for sure. But one of the big questions I have, vis-a-vis your comment regarding charter schools and merit pay, is why was there a need for charter schools? And what was the genesis of the notion of merit pay?
Okay. I think charter schools exist to give some people a quasi-private school education using public dollars. So I think the people who want that, whether they're parents or whether they're people who are in favor of privatization of public services, got together and they came up with the idea. The record shows that they don't, the best study to date in the country is the Credo study from Stanford. And roughly 3 to 1 on a ratio, students do worse in charter schools than they do in public schools. And then there's a bulk in the middle of roughly 40%. But the remaining kids do worse. Now, the kids who do better in Massachusetts are kids who are in schools like the match school that basically evict kids at a rate of 60 to 75% over a 4-year period. So they do well with the kids who remain. So I think what it does is it provides the parents of those kids who remain a free private school experience paid for with public dollars. So that's why I think they exist. I think the privateers have won out, and they have basically gotten the public and people to be in favor of it by saying that it's an innovation. I don't feel it's an innovation at all. As far as merit pay goes, we have negotiated with the school department a school-based merit pay, meaning if a school does well, every teacher gets $225. That's all the school department wanted to pay, and that was fine with us. But everyone gets it. It's not individually based. And as I said up until yesterday, people might look askance at that, but as of today, people are saying, well, maybe that does make more sense than giving just certain individuals merit pay.
In all due respect,
yeah.
I still want to go back to the question of why was it that parents got together and thought that they needed a semi-private school quality of education for their students, and why did merit pay actually even get inserted into the conversation? I don't.
Okay, all right. I'll try it again. I'm sorry. I think people who are paying for private or parochial schools, given the increase recently in tuitions, are looking for a way out, and I don't blame them. Therefore, the charter school movement has been spawned. The charter schools are no more miraculous than public schools, but they offer a closed environment where kids who mess up are evicted immediately and they come back to public schools. Brighton High, English High get kids from the match school every June, kids who are supposed to be graduating the match school. So if a kid goes to the match school and messes up, the kid is evicted, and that provides, I guess, at the match school, a quiet, wholesome environment for the kids who remain. So it's desirable for those parents. And by the way, that's their business. Good luck to them. But that's why I think they've grown. They're desirable for those people. They're not necessarily desirable for the kids who are evicted from those schools. As far as why did merit pay bring up? Because I think in the private sector, and we all know how wonderful the private sector is, they have individual merit pay. And it's gradually migrated to the public sector. That's why. I don't think necessarily it's because people actually think, and I hope they don't, that merit pay works, because there isn't a shred of evidence that it does work. As far as why it's migrated, I think people are looking for any solution. And rather than paying to improve schools by fixing some resources, for example, if the typical school in Boston looked and acted like the typical school in the suburbs and had adequate resources, the scores would go up, I guarantee it. But that's too expensive. It's much cheaper to give a teacher $225 for improved scores. So I think it's a cheaper way for people to do business.
Any other comments from our panel? Then we'll move on to this question. Mike? Yeah, I have some thoughts. I want to try to keep the conversation flowing here, but let me just quickly, if I can, start from the micro, go to the macro really quick. First of all, I live in Mission Hill, and I live about a stone's throw away from Roxbury Charter Middle School. It is one of the best middle schools in the country, public or private. It has some of the best test results, some of the best academic performance of its students. Not intimately familiar with every detail about the school, but I am a big fan, and I believe that several hundred kids on a given day are getting an amazing opportunity at being educated in the city, and every single one of these kids is on a free lunch program. We're educating kids in the city with one of the greatest schools ever, that happens to be charter school. I do agree with President Stutman's analysis that the funding mechanisms are not equitable, and I also agree with what he's saying that English language learners and special education students are not being accepted into many, if not most, if not all, of some of these charter schools. The macro is this. There was recently an article in the Boston Globe about segregation in the Boston public schools and Springfield schools. And many of these elements go well beyond the four corners of a contract that are negotiated with the teachers union and the city. They go into much larger macroeconomic issues. One of the solutions to the inequities that they talk about in the Globe was housing policy. Question 2 is on the ballot, and they're trying to get rid of 40B. 40B is a housing policy that says suburbs have to house affordable units of housing in their towns, or in the event that they don't have a certain percentage, then they would have to pay into affordable housing fund. And there's a group that's trying to get rid of that policy. But the reality is that the luck of the draw where someone just happens to be born, whether it's a wealthy community or a poor community, whether it's in the city or outside of the city, often will play more into the role of the child's education than anything. The fact that we're talking about a near $200 million high school being constructed in anywhere in Massachusetts or in this country is just highly inequitable, and is a fair point that Richard Stutman started his conversation out with. These are complex issues, but I don't believe we throw out great ideas, many of which are coming from our charter schools. I think we have to consider any of them.
Next question. And please state who you are and your question.
My name is Brian, and I have a question. I'm kind of curious with the collaboration between the city and the Boston Teachers Union in regards to the high school dropout rate. How it's increasing, and research shows that students who drop out have much lower lifetime earning potential, and the rate of incarceration is much higher. And both of those have great economic and personal implications. What are some of the strategies that the city and the schools and the teachers union hope to employ to help keep the students in school and on track to college?
Well, there is a healthy collaboration with the school department and the private industry council. I would say the private industry council carries the day on this issue in the city, and Neil Sullivan and his group does a terrific job. I think what we don't do well is figure out why kids drop out. And kids drop out, the indicators are, in the 8th grade they start, their attendance rate suffers and they start failing classes. And it's very difficult to turn that around. I mean, it doesn't start when the child is a senior. It starts when the child's in as early as 6th grade. One of the issues, and I think this is an issue that people have yet really to confront, is the issue of the MCAS. There are some children who know early on that they're not going to pass the MCAS. And there's another group of children who, because of the restrictions in the curriculum, as I gave the example with my daughter, who took a 2-hour block of math and English every day, that's 4 hours. Almost every child in the Boston Public Schools goes through that curriculum every day. It is exceedingly boring. It's very narrow. It does not have enough room in it to attract kids to go to school for drama, art, Spanish, music, French, whatever. because there's no time in the school day. I think that is a contributor. In fact, I think it's actually a greater contributor to the dropout rate than almost anything. I think it's far greater than the kids who don't think they're going to pass and therefore give up. I think kids are bored. And I think we have to look at that. Now, it's very difficult to look at that in this climate because everyone pushes math and ELA and to the exclusion of almost every other subject. I have yet to find a kid that you couldn't interest in one subject or another, but you have to offer that subject. And I don't think we do a good job of that.
One of the schools in my neighborhood, Mission Hill, the Tobin School, didn't have gym. They weren't offering it for years. They also didn't offer recess. And so one of the things that I did was I got a gym course and a gym instructor for them. And the difference between what they had the year prior and anecdotally, and we're studying it with data as well, was day and night. Teachers were able to talk to these kids, they were able to relate to them, connect with them in a much more real way when the gym program began. You know, I think, you know, my vision for public education in the city of Boston is longer hours, it's a full day. I mean, you know, we run our schools still the same way we run them for decades. I believe schools should be from 9 to 5. I believe kids should all have gym, music, art classes. I believe kids should eat healthy food and grow their own food. And I believe that those things should all happen in schools. And until we're there, none of us should be satisfied.
Let me use my prerogative to ask a question. I think we've had too much of a love fest right now, so I want to ask a more provocative question about unions, public unions. Why is it so hard? I mean, a lot of the outrage stories we hear in the Herald especially, in the Globe, are about work rules or about behaviors or about benefits that everybody gets outraged about. Fire department's a classic example of, so we won't pick on the teachers union for a while, we'll pick on the firefighters union, for whom, you know, the last job you had determines what your pension is going to be, so you get the artificial, you know, the stories about artificially inflating your pension, all the stories about work rules. And the question is, why is it so easy for, in certain cases, for certain unions, particularly fire and police, obvious, to allow to get the accretion of benefits that people regard as outrageous over time? Why is it so hard for mayors and for municipal leaders to resist those kinds of accretion of benefits over time? And then why does it, what effect does that have on the perception of unions at a certain point? Something potentially provocative. Yeah. Why is it so hard to resist that? Because
the average, do you mind if I answer just on the pension piece? The average state pension is like $28,000, and because of Billy Bulger with the housing allowance, we're all suffering. You know, the reality is the average state pension, as I said, is $28,000. People aren't getting rich. People work for 30 or so years. They don't jump up in their last year and get a house that's worth $200 grand and then ask the state retirement board to allow it to be prorated over their last 3 years. The average person, these are just things the average person reads about. Doesn't affect the average person. So because of the exceptions, you know, the person who's a library trustee in Needham for 2 days, or it doesn't matter where Andover does, we don't care. That person shouldn't dictate policy, and that's what drives people crazy. And you know what? They should be driven crazy, and they shouldn't be allowed to use their house in their last 3 years, or library trustee time 2 days a week and get a year's credit. That isn't the way it works with the average Joe, I can assure you.
I agree with the statement on pensions. The abuse is, I think, far more blown up and you know, should be tolerated, but it's far more, you read a lot more about that than the reality of most pensions. The, you know, why it's so entrenched, why it's so difficult to reverse. The why, the what you're talking about, maybe you're talking about the ability to change existing rules, the ability to maybe change our healthcare plans and things like that. Well, let's take healthcare. All these things are governed by statute. So to change and mostly state statute, to change the state statute, you need half the state legislature to support it and the governor's signature. And so that means that half the state legislature would have to agree, and there's tremendous pressure up at the State House where unions are making their case right. And sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're not. But the current law, as it relates to, say, joining the GIC, is that in order for the city of Boston to bring its workforce into the state insurance program, like Brookline, like Quincy, like those 19 other cities and towns in Massachusetts, is it requires 70% of the workforce to agree to go into that program. Now, teachers union is 40% of the workforce right then and there. So President Stutman actually holds the card on whether or not we even can have that conversation. And of course, the other unions have a role in this as well. But he is the largest union, so he actually wields a lot of clout in this area. I guess it brings us back to what Professor Bluestone said, that until we're at a point where we're completely at the same side of the table, where we're on, where our fight is the same, and I think it is, we're not going to fix some of these problems. You know, I agree with a lot of what Richard Stutman said, and but the thing I didn't agree with him is the whole notion of having, I think he said, you're trying to put the pay on the backs of the teachers. Well, you know, we only have that $2.45 billion we talked about. And granted, there are plenty of fertile areas where we can find better ways of spending our money and saving our money. But that graph I showed you of that healthcare going up at 143%, while everything else was going up at 30-some-odd%, that graph says everything you need to know. That if we continue on the road we're on today, we won't be able to do the things we want to do tomorrow. And we have to be on the same side of the table, because these are our, you know, these union workers, their kids are in the schools. They live on our streets. They depend on those police. They depend on our parks. They depend on the city working too. It is their fight. And I believe we have more in common than we do apart.
Barry.
Richard?
No, go ahead.
Let me add to that, and I want to play inside baseball here. As I said in my opening remarks, I have been desperately worried about the loss of the trade union movement in this country. When you look over and over again over the 60, 70 years of the trade union movement since the passage of the Wagner Act in 1935, there's probably been more progressive legislation passed with the support of unions than with the support of any other independent force in the state, in the country. You lose that progressive force, and we're in real trouble. So my question, I guess I'd like to hear Richard, and then I'd like to hear Michael respond to it too as well, is that, and I mentioned it very quickly, my great fear was I always expected the right wing to attack unions. They have the Right to Work Committee, which has been fighting unions since 1935. But what we're seeing over and over again in greater and greater numbers are, number one, progressive forces who are fighting against unions. The Boston Foundation, essentially the governor and the mayor, who have fought for things that the union is opposed to, charter schools, school reform. The President of the United States, who, if I remember correctly, is not a member of the Tea Party. And so we're starting to get that, and that, of course, engenders lots and lots of people, including lots of very progressive liberal folks, maybe some people in this room itself, who are starting to question the role of public unions and are starting to ask their political leaders to rein you guys in. My question, therefore, is, how do you respond to that? What tactics and strategies do we have here in Massachusetts so that unions, in fact, can rebuild the trust that they once had? Are you learning from what some of the other states are doing, like Illinois, which is working very hard on this issue, at least the other major national union, the National Education Association? And what other things do you think you could be doing in order to rebuild the trust? Similarly, what role can city government play to help people understand the important role that unions do play without risking, alienating almost all your constituency? Richard?
Okay, well, thanks for the nice question, Barry.
We're a university, we like to ask good questions.
Well, I think the word progressive is thrown around an awful lot, and I think some of the people who are masquerading as progressives, but who really believe in privatization, ought really to be able to shed their label and not be called progressive, because I don't consider someone who supports charter schools, who says it's an innovation, to be progressive. So, other people may, and I'm not gonna go so far as to say President Obama is a progressive. I understand that's heresy, but I'm gonna, I'm gonna have to be honest. Now, the mayor is flipped on the issue of charter schools, as has the governor.
Right.
So, the fact that today the governor is in favor of charter schools, and he wasn't 2 years ago, I'm not so sure that means he's serious about this. It means that he obviously wants to get reelected and he senses the public mood. So I don't bow down to that and to say we're wrong. I think the example I gave on merit pay is instructive, because I was in conversations all day today with people who were shocked at the Vanderbilt study. Now, I think you have to realize that people come up with ideas, and it's easy for people to take us on and to find a boogeyman. I mean, who else do you blame for bad schools but the teachers union? They're not going to blame themselves the fact that our schools have been suffering for years of neglect, no maintenance, infrastructure falling down. No one is going to blame us for that. The Globe, certainly, with its own labor problems, isn't going to say, and by the way, the Globe has tremendous labor problems, and just depending on who you talk to, you can obviously learn all about that. But the Globe isn't going to be friendly to us and say, the union has a good point on charter schools. So we can't expect it. So the expectations and the fact that we've been put out there as scapegoats, I think, is the real issue. And some people who pretend to be our friends, who say, really, we don't want you to disappear, they don't mean that at all. They do want us to disappear. And it'll be a lot easier for them to run the country without us in place. And I fully appreciate the fact that we have done a lot of good. And I would say, if you gave us a fair shot now and you listened to us. For example, we would be very willing to sit down with the school department, as in fact we did today for 2 hours, to try to work out ways to save some money and to economize. But we don't control the way things work. In other words, I don't have the wherewithal to say to the superintendent, I think you really should go in this direction, because that's just not the way things are done. She controls that. Well, we control it, and we're always put in a position of having to defend ourselves. And that's partly because other people have gathered around to put us out there against our will as the people who are solely responsible for the system's decline. And the truth is, we are not responsible for the system's decline. And if people paid attention, which it's very difficult to pay attention in this climate, because people think they can control us because they pay our salaries. And if we say to people, well, you do pay our salaries and we appreciate that, we're not arrogant, but no one listens to us. And if you want to listen to us, we'll give you some ways that the system can save money. We'll give you some ways that we can cut down on health insurance. That door is not open to us. So I don't disagree that we've been painted in a corner. We are. But I don't see any way out in the short term, given the decline in the economy.
I just think, there are some fundamental broken relationships between management and labor, and I think there's culpability on both sides. 4 years to be fighting with one of our public safety unions is just unacceptable. I do think that the firefighter case study was valuable to see a new way forward. We did resolve that challenge in a matter of weeks. There was some unique circumstances that allowed us to do so, but I think it's worth greater study. I think we need to realize that we are on the same page and on the same team. For President Stutman to say that his ideas of how we can save money in the Boston public schools aren't being listened to, I think is shameful on the administration side if they're not listening to him, in fact. I think they should. And I think there needs to be a new dynamic at the table. In terms of communicating these challenges to the public, I think transparency is very important. I think you folks have no idea what goes on at the negotiating table, nor do I. It is a complex world with thick phone book type rules that govern how people can do what they're supposed to do. I can say that at least the firefighter exercise was interesting in that the first time the public and everyone seemed to be peering into a world that they knew very little about. And I'm not prepared to cede my job, responsibility, and duties to the public at large. All right, that's why you elect me. You send me to sit in those meetings, understand, and make my best attempt. But I do think it's important you hear and see what happens and help guide us to some extent. And there's an expression here that with a smoker's fire, with thousands of people can't be wrong. You know, when people start to react to some of these issues, it's important that they're listened to. And some of it is just red meat and fodder and anger and what have you, and Tea Party and all that stuff, right? But some of it's legitimate. And I think we have a lot to learn from that. So I think a little bit of transparency, I think a little bit more being on the same side with each other. It's not just can we get along, it's that we have to align the systems so that both parties can work to common shared solutions that move our city forward. I think it's possible to do. I say that because we went through it with the firefighters. I think it can be done in other areas.
In the consideration of time, we have 3 more questions. We're going to have all 3 questions asked, then we'll do a round of responses. So John, go ahead. 4. Wait, no. 1, 2, 3, and then 4. All right. Whatever. Go ahead. 4 questions. Answer it quickly. Ask quickly.
All right, very quickly. Mike Crawford. This morning I heard an article on WBUR. They were discussing how less important than charter schools, merit pay, even facilities, is parental involvement in the schools and with the students' education. I just was wondering, what was your opinion on getting the parents involved in the City of Boston schools, and do you go along with those reports?
Okay, that question was about the role of parents in schools. Next question.
My parents are both teachers, so I have utmost respect for the profession. My question is in regards to layoffs and performance versus seniority. It seems like when layoffs, my impression is that when you have layoffs, the least tenured teachers are the first ones to go. So you get young, creative, passionate teachers who are laid off, whereas some of the older, more established teachers who may have lost some of the passion seem to be very safe. I was wondering if you could just comment on that, if you think that will change at all going forward.
Just repeat, in case anybody here, it's about basically work rules and seniority and deciding who gets to stay with us. Number 3 and then number 4.
Steve Glickel, my question is actually Professor Bluestone about financing. It seems that everything is going up, health insurance, and yet the workers are supposed to pay for everything. It's our fault that the health insurance is going up. Mott's applesauce in New York, they have to take wage cuts when the company's making a huge profit. So why is it always placed on the people who are getting benefits and none on the way things are financed in this country?
Okay, about finance. And finally, last question. Right here. Abby, you want to? Sure. Go ahead.
Do we still need Medco?
Do we still need Medco? For those of you, that's the program that has students from the city going to suburban schools. And finally,
President Stutman, I thought you had some very informative and interesting and edifying things to say, but I was disappointed that you, I felt like your response to Barry's question was to say people are really progressives who are blaming us. They're, and we're being scapegoated, and I don't really have a plan. And I was very disappointed to hear that, because my sense was that some of the dialogue was, how are we going to move in the future and change this dialogue? And I was disappointed in that answer, and I was hopeful maybe you could give it another shot.
Okay. Panelists, feel free to respond however you want.
All right, should we do all 5?
Yeah.
I will.
Do the
quickly.
education policy ones first.
Parent involvement, I mean, we obviously support the more the better. We've tried to negotiate more parent contact hours, and we're very happy to do it, voluntary or involuntary. We think parents, the more they take a role in the operation of a building and their child's education, the better. On layoffs, we really haven't had a lot of layoffs, but that isn't the answer. That isn't the question. The question is, if there's a layoff, do we keep the young, energetic teacher and get rid of someone who is less energetic? I'm not sure in other professions, the older, experienced person. By the way, the old teachers in Boston are not me. I'm ancient. The old teachers in Boston are now 35. The young teachers are 25, and I don't think that the older teachers are less energetic than the 25-year-olds, and the people like me are few and far between, and I think I'm a little better than I was 10 years ago myself. The assumption of financing, that's a very good question. We accept things the way they are and say the city has no money, but we don't look at the realm of possibility. So for examples, the nonprofits, of which I'm sitting in one, the nonprofits don't pay their fair share of property tax. Everyone knows that. Not just the Northeasterns of the world, but the Mass General Hospitals of the world. And we could raise around $80 million a year that could be used for good city improvements if we did tax nonprofits. The law on nonprofits dates from 1830. And it may be time to revisit that law. On the issue of Metco, I think Metco should continue. It gives kids an experience outside the city, and I think it's an experience that is lacking in the city, so I would support the continuation of Metco. I don't disagree with the woman who said I didn't answer the question properly. I agree with you, I didn't answer it well. The problem is public employee unions are on the defensive, and it's very difficult to convince someone that you're not at fault for something they've been hearing about for 10 years. And that's the truth. If you came and visited with me as I went around to different schools and talked to people, you would realize that the schools should not have received a lot of the press that they've been getting for the last whenever. And I do think it is I don't want to use the word plot, but I do think it is in the interest of people who would privatize us. And you saw the statistics. The unionized workforce has gone from 35 to 7%. There are people out there who are happy about that. And they're very happy, and he's happy. I appreciate that. So for them, they want to encourage the continued decrease of unionization. So it's in their best interest to keep saying that we are at fault for poor schools and to promote charter schools. And I can't undo what they want to say. I can just tell you that they're giving a false impression.
In reverse order, I think the city of Boston would be a worse city if we didn't have the teachers union in it. Teachers, what do they want? At the end of the day, they want our kids to succeed, right? It's in their interest. They have to teach these kids every single day. They want a fair pay for a decent day's work. They also think about what else they want. They want to make sure that their employees are working. Right? It's actually in their interest to have smaller classrooms. Why? Smaller classrooms means that there's more teachers and their numbers are larger. Small classrooms are proven tools to ensure that kids are working. Extended day? Yeah, sure they want extended day. Why would they want extended day? It means more hours to work. They're actually allies in many critical areas where we need them. And also, Court Street management, I'm not convinced they have all the answers. I don't think they do. It's a push and pull that is essential in a democracy. And I think we're better for them. Without the teachers union, you have folks who go the other end of the spectrum. You think the privatization of education has been a success story? It hasn't. It's been a complete, abysmal failure. That's the total opposite end of the spectrum. I think the teachers union are an easy target. I think they need to be a little more flexible in certain areas, but I think they've been an unfair target, and I'm glad they're there. With regard to parent involvement, I took a delegation of leaders from our city to the Harlem Children's Zone and met with Jeffrey Cannon, who is running one of the most interesting programs in our country. Expensive, but interesting. He deals with the issue of parental involvement every single day for the 10,000 kids that live in Harlem. And he has found some real creative solutions that we all can learn from. Some of my delegation were other city councilors, members of the school committee, civic leaders, academics, and it's a great model. This is the model that our president is trying to push us towards. It's not just an education model, it's also a community-based organization model, and I think it's something that all of you should check out the book by, was it Paul Tothison? He wrote the book,
Whatever it takes.
Yeah, Whatever It Takes, thank you. It's a great book, and I think it's a great model. Not necessarily transferable as easily as we can. Seniority, seniority is the heart of what the union movement has meant. I think it's fine, but you have to allow options for programs to come in. Teach for America shouldn't be barred from the Boston Public Schools because we have a seniority rule. We can do both, and we can do both successfully. METCO should continue, and in fact, I think education should be more regional. It shouldn't be, and that's, see my earlier comments, that a kid's going to get educated because of the luck of where he happened to be born, as opposed to the fact that everyone should be entitled to a good, free public education. So I think we should move more in the direction of regionalization, and I don't think we should lose programs like METCO. Thank you.
Well, let me, Barry, last comment.
Right. Let me just make a last comment. We'll close it. I guess I want to respond to Richard. And that is, the progressives I'm talking about are progressives who have fought for progressive issues across the board. They've been with workers and on workers' side against management, against corporate interests all their lives. They fought with parents in the inner city for the things that inner city parents need. And yet, you have lost, or the public unions have lost trust with them. I still think they're very progressive, but they're not on your side anymore. I think it's also true that we find more and more people in the public sector, many of them in this state who are good Democrats, who refuse to raise taxes, may even vote to cut taxes because they believe they're not getting a dollar's worth of service for a dollar they pay in tax. And particularly in an era when many of our citizens are very worried about their own jobs and worried about how they're going to put food on their own table, they feel abused. I think much of this is incorrect. I'm a strong defender of unions. I'm a member of two of them. But I think we've done a very poor job of making our case. There's no reason, Richard, why the BTU and the MTA can't be out forward with their progressive agenda and advocate for it all the time, whether the school board's in favor or not, or sitting down and talking to you. Illinois is doing that now. I've been spending a lot of time with the Illinois Teachers Association, and they're doing that. And it's a major part of their program now, is to explain the kind of reforms that they support, and they're beginning to get public support for themselves and public support for their members. I think a lot more has to be done there, because I think inevitably, if that doesn't happen, you're going to find more and more political leaders, not just the governor, not just the mayor, not just the president, who are not going to be supporting the trade unions, the public unions, because they think they will lose elections by supporting them. And I think there's a big public relations battle that has to be fought, but it also has to be one in which the unions themselves are coming up with grand new bargains, in a sense, to tell the American people, tell Massachusetts, this is where we want to go. We're going to be working for the best interests of your kids and your best interests, and this is how we're going to do it.
I'd like to thank our speakers, I'd like to thank our guests.